Make sure it's recording. Yeah, last time I didn't record it all, which is probably good because I predicted. I mean, I got the Super Bowl completely right because there is no evidence. Okay, so we're looking at our good dead friend Spinoza, and we saw that he argues that God's got to exist using a version of the ontological argument, so we get to God. And so far, that's pretty standard. If you talk to people like Descartes and other thinkers, maybe, yeah, sure, God exists. And where Spinoza kind of gets a little different is where he ends up heading into pantheism. And roughly put, his argument is that, well, if we had two beings that were identical, well, we couldn't have that because they can't be identical because they'd be one rather than two. If they're different, then if we have another thing that's different, then whatever the second thing's got, we're missing from the first thing. It would limit it. It'd be less than infinite. So, since God's supposed to be infinite, there can only be one God. But here's where the problem arises. Not only can there be one God, which standard theologians will say, yeah, one God, on board with you. But he says it's all God. So, we're all parts of God, which of course is not standard theology. Now, one of the challenges, interesting challenges in theology is, how do you reconcile God's infinity, being all good, all powerful, and knowing, infinitely, God, with there being other stuff? In other words, how can we exist separately from God if God is infinite and perfect? And some people come up with answers, and some people will just say, well, there's no God. Problem solved. Because atheism solves, I guess, lots of problems. Unless they go to hell, then I guess it creates lots of problems. So it could be bad. Now, his main objective, though, is not so much to get to, God. God for him is kind of a means to an end, because his ultimate goal was, I mentioned, sort of the self-help approach. His claim is that we are trapped in bondage to our feelings for all the nice stuff. Like, for example, if someone is really attached to the Super Bowl and really devoted to the Panthers, and they're screaming, in the Super Bowl, screaming and throwing around their Doritos and beer and so forth, no! And they're feeling a great deal of pain. And probably if they drank away their sorrows, they're probably still feeling a little pain. And so what he wants to do is find a way for us to solve those problems so life hurts less. Now, as part of his approach to this, he claims that there is no free will. There is no chance. There is no choice. Because it's all God, and God is whatever God does because he's God. He does what he does because he is what he is. Things couldn't be any different. And so God is free because he's not controlled from the outside, because there's nothing outside of God, but he doesn't have free will because he couldn't choose between options. He's got to always do what he does. Now, the implication for this, of course, applies to us too, because we're part of God. So everything that occurs by necessity. So with the football, the Panthers had to lose. So if the quarterback of the Panthers was Spinoza, he would say, could not have won, because that's the way it had to be. Could not have been otherwise. And similarly, the quarterback of the Bronco really can't rejoice in his victory because that's the way it had to be. It could not have turned out any differently. Now, we think we're free because of ignorance. So last Thursday, when I, of course, totally predicted the Super Bowl 100% correctly, we didn't know, because we didn't know the future. And so we were still up in the air. We didn't know what's between the Broncos, the Panthers, the Red Sox. But now that it's happened, of course, we know the results. But according to Spinoza, if we had enough information and enough ability to reason it through, we would be able to predict stuff, because things could not be otherwise. It would have to be that way. I mean, to use an analogy, it's kind of like if you're doing a proof in mathematics, there's no surprise ending in a way. You just, or to use the simple example, if you're adding 1 + 1, there's no twist ending. It doesn't turn out to be, this time it's 3. It's always, 2. And that's a simple, when you're doing a triangle, there's never a twist, it's always 3 sides. And Spinoza thinks that if we had enough information, we could do that for everything. Or so he thinks. So how does this all connect to his ethics and freedom? Well, the problem as he sees it is that we are, again, we're connected to people that will possibly betray us, fail us, change, or die. That will hurt. And speaking of betrayal, Valentine's Day is coming up. The day of ultimate betrayal. No, wrong day. If we get attached to our car or job, we can lose all of these things. So what he wants to do is find a way to ease that pain, ease that suffering. Now, he differs from his predecessors in many important ways. One is this. Kind of the classical view of humans is that we're special, so very special, as the song goes. So we're exempt, from the rest of the world. We're not subject to the same laws that rule, sticks and stones and water, or the laws that rule squirrels and badgers, both honey and non-honey badgers, or honey mustard badgers. I assume that's a thing. Doritos probably makes them dipped in honey. That probably makes them very angry. That's why they're probably so ferocious. I would be ferocious too if I was dipped into some sort of sauce. But we're supposed to be, exempt, above those laws. Now, the obvious implication of, the new science and Spinoza's view of the world is that we're not apart from the world. We don't have the special exemption from the rest of the laws. Now, again, in the past, and of course, people today still have this view that we're somehow exempt. The laws of physics, biology, necessity, we're special. But Spinoza says, nope, no one literally is above the law. So he thinks he can apply all of that logical stuff to us. And what he wanted to do, and endeavored to do, is work through the emotions and work out geometrically all our emotions and their effects. So he wanted to develop a science, a deductive science of the emotions. And so what he was doing would be, well, something people are trying to do today, working out exactly how the emotions work. One example of this would be enjoyable research, if you see the movie, was it Inside Out? Is that? Yeah, where they have the emotions, going through how they work. And so what he's kind of do, far less budget, less cool animation, that sort of deal. How do the emotions, work? How do they affect us? And he thinks he can work out a system just like with geometry. We have a geometry that enables us to do proofs and, prove things like about right angles and squares and planes. It is we do the same thing with, anger, sadness. As you can see, this is why I didn't call it through the animation. Maybe someday. I have a dream. And so we can work out the same sort of details for the emotions and a true science of emotions. And of course, people who do psychology, that's what some of them are trying to do. Work out like how do they work. And a lot of it today connects to, the biochemistry of the brain and how that functions. So even though Spinoza was looking at it in terms of deductive, like geometry, the same sort of projects continue. Only now it's being done with, chemistry, neuroscience, etc. And scientists now are making claims similar to Spinoza, working out the mechanics of emotions. For example, there was an interesting study involving, nothing directly to do with Spinoza, but interesting to show how what Spinoza was doing applies to today. There was a study on love and voles. Voles are little critters, little mammals. They like hang out. Some of them are prairie voles, and they live on prairies. And one thing that the scientist was interested about is there are some voles that pair up for life. They're monogamous voles. And other voles are just swinger voles. They're on all the time, backwards, back. And he wondered, why do they do that? And so what he did, and also he wondered about, he had feelings of grief and so forth. So the researcher went through and basically analyzed the voles, their chemistry. And his conclusion is that love is basically chemistry, neurons firing, etc. And he found that, the difference between the voles, the voles that were monogamous, mostly the ones that weren't, was just chemicals. So the idea is basically a chemical romance, that it's just all the workings of the neurons. And essentially that's, with modern science, is what Spinoza was saying. Love is, for Spinoza, all those particular qualities leading to particular results. And according to modern research and science, love is like all that chemistry. And modern science is trying to offer kind of the same deal that Spinoza did to explain how that works. Now, is there any appeal to turning the emotions into science, to having a chemical analysis, so to speak, or a neural analysis of the feelings, so that when Valentine's Day rolls around, you can say to someone, you can have a card that says, baby, I, neural pattern, chemistry, 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 towards you. My endorphins are triggered by your presence, for now. But someday I shall grow bored of you because that's how biology works. So eternal I'll last. Have some chocolate. Yeah, I mean, what effect does that have on Valentine's Day? If love is just chemical, is chemistry.
I don't know, depends on who you ask.
True.
I mean, 'cause I know a lot of biology and chemistry nerds who love that.
They would love that. It's their chocolate.
Yeah.
What about normal people, though?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, so there is that, that very practical concern. Does knowing more about our emotions, the neurons, the chemistry, does that, change how we interact, in life? Would it affect us? Now, one possible answer would be, well, no, we just keep doing what we keep doing. It changes, nothing. And of course, the fact that it's kind of a bit of a, kind of like a paradox, that if we're all chemically determined, we just do what we do, we can't do otherwise. And if we can do otherwise, then we're not chemically determined. But anyways, the project sort of continues. So I guess as a final point, is it something we should do? Should we be engaging in research in emotions to figure out how they work, to continue Spinoza's project? What good could come of it? Why would it be useful?
Well, it would help you control their emotions if they want to.
Yeah, if they want to. It can also help what? Like, how can we, if we know more about how the emotions work, how can we control them?
Well, it's mental illness. And it's when we study the chemical responses that we're better able to develop drugs and treatments that help people who have issues.
Yeah, because if someone's sad, and their sadness is not because bad things are happening in their life, but because they have, these neurons are firing the wrong way, in the wrong order, just making stuff up. And if you put in a little chemical, and it goes back to working right, and they feel good, they feel fine, normal, that would seem to be something very, very useful. Yeah, so one very useful thing would be is if we think of our emotions as sort of mechanical and chemical things, systems. If your car is a problem, you just repair it, you fix it. And if our emotional problems are just defects in our neurons, we can just repair them. We can fix them. We can have chemical happiness. Now, in fiction, literature, is that sort of chemical control of people's emotions, even for benign purposes, is that sometimes looked at as sinister, problematic? Yeah, what's worrisome about that, looking at the emotions as pure chemistry and physiology? That love is just a chemical romance.
Possibility.
Yeah, once you realize what it is, you might think, I don't want to do that. Yeah, because taking the example of love, Valentine's Day coming up. If someone truly believed that love was just literally that, just neurons that happen to be firing, that cause a person to be attracted to someone else, but it's just purely chemical, and it's just biology, and they truly understood that, might it affect them?
Could they truly love someone?
Yeah, because they would be thinking there is no love like in the sense of like the Princess Bride, true love. There's just, it's like liking, being drawn to salt or chocolate or, sweet stuff. You just like it just triggers endorphins. And so the special feeling you have for a person is not special, it's just a chemical reaction. Just like boiling water or mixing, baking soda and vinegar. Yeah, so we might say that sort of view may rob us of what's important and special about life. Whatever. So, what is Spinoza going to offer us, though? What do we get in return for accepting that our emotions are these necessary things, these processes? Well, this is what he claims. He offers us the following deal. Once we understand how they work, he thinks we're able to control them. And this will affect our happiness. And I'll give a concrete example. Everyone feels sad sometimes, depression. And sometimes there's a reason for it. Something is happening that legitimately, like you lose a pet, or your Super Bowl team loses the Super Bowl, or they discontinue your favorite Doritos, for example, or the McRibs are no longer available. And that would be all good grounds for sadness. But sometimes people just feel sad. Now, if you know that your sadness is just a chemical malfunction, and you're fully aware of that, can that help you? Can that be useful to know? Yeah, because if you know that you're not sad for any reason, and it's just sort of like a malfunction, then it's not something to be like ashamed of. You don't feel shame when your car needs, your check engine light comes on, like, oh, shame. You go and get your engine checked. And so it's something you could go and address and get fixed. Going back to the point about mental health. And we look at our emotions in that way, we could say, well, it's not working properly, I need to go get that fixed. Or even if you can't get it fixed, if you know that, okay, this is occurring and it's merely a chemical malfunction, or this is how it works, it puts a perspective on it that, well, I just gotta wait, and eventually it will sort of like reset. And so maybe it's got something that's pretty useful there. So his claim is, once we work out all the emotions, we'll have better control over them, or so he claims. A bit like Vulcans, for example. So how's this going to work out? Well, he does borrow some stuff from previous philosophers, like all philosophers do. And he notes that one thing we got is this: desire for self-preservation. And this will tie into the whole, the analysis of emotions and what he's trying to get to. Now, is it true that we try to preserve ourselves? Yeah, because if something tries to kill us, what do we do?
Try to not catch it.
Yeah, either we run away, or the polite thing to do is try to kill it right back. It's only polite. It's like if someone gives you a gift, you gotta give them a gift. Someone starts shooting at you, you kind of wasn't shooting back. Gift of bullets, gift of bullets. It's just good manners. I asked Miss Manners about that. She was totally behind it. Not really. She might be, though. Now, he does bring in being a philosopher, brings in a special term called conatus. Which does sound like a character like in a Gladiator film, which might be, or maybe a cool name for your next playing a video game, conatus, the mighty scourge of the emotions. Now for him, conatus means this. It means striving or endeavor. And this is what gives us the inner force for self-preservation. And he believes that everything, all the individual things, have an essence. And this goes back to thinkers like Aristotle, that each thing has an essence, and this is what basically drives us. It's our specific active force. So it's more than mere not dying. So what we've got in each one of us is an active force, this conatus, which, to steal from the army, drives us to be fully what we are. So preservation is not just avoiding death, it's preserving who you are, being fully what you are. And our good dead friend Aristotle also had a similar view, that each thing had a nature, and it would, fulfill its function, would be to be fully what it is in an excellent way. The Taoists too, similar view. Now, is he right about this? Does each thing have an essence that defines what it is, that drives it to be what it truly is? Or is he just like making some stuff up?
Yes, I think so.
Well, how do we tell?
Everything is already in this view already planned out. It is what it is because it has to be.
Yeah, we would have, it'd be, to use an analogy, it'd be kind of like our programming. That's what we're going to be. It's, we're pre-programmed in a way to be that. But how do we tell? How do we tell if we have this inner active force that makes us who we are? Well, I guess we could look at, movies and literature. Is that actually a common theme in movies where characters, claim they've got to be who they are? Yeah, of course, the argument about literature is kind of weak because they're just making stuff up. But yeah, kind of an interesting point. So we are driven by that, according to Spinoza, that inner nature that makes us who we are. So we've got this driving force pushing us along. Now, in addition to our push for self-preservation, to remain who we are, we also have, well, at least we do, we have self-awareness. Now, this of course creates a bit of a problem because we're told that we don't have any free will. Everything is necessary. You just do what you do because you are what you are. But he thinks we can have something, which is this. If we aim for illusory goals that are illusions, such as fame and fortune, that are beyond our control, then we won't be self-determined. We'll be controlled by other stuff, pulled along by that. What we need to do, according to Spinoza, is rationally understand events and not be controlled by forces outside of us. So he thinks that'll make us happy. So how will this work? Well, it comes down to how he thinks the mind works. So this is the mind. This is the mind on drugs. Love those commercials. They still have those? They stopped, they just gave up. I think because they found out, as a side point, nothing to do with Spinoza, but they actually found out that people who saw them were more likely to use drugs. For real. Because people knew they weren't alone in using drugs. At least that's what was claimed. One of the ironies of that campaign. Or maybe it's because they just get tired of seeing the commercials. Anyways, this is the mind. So what's going on there? Well, the mind, he says, is acted upon, but also acts upon stuff. Now, he thinks, as far as the mind understands clearly what's going on, this is kind of a weird, unusual approach, because normally we think like acting upon things involves, quite literally, like I'm acting upon the coat, or gravity is acting on me. But he thinks that if you clearly understand something accurately, then you're initiating activity, you're acting on the things. If your ideas are inadequate, then you're being acted upon. Now, what he's focusing on, of course, here is passions. Now, we normally think of the passions, of course, as, like romance stuff, like Harlequin romances and so on. But of course, back in the day, it meant all emotions. So I guess we could just go with emotions. So how does that work? Well, this is what he claims. He likes the terms passions, though, because we get our term passive from passions. Now, passive means what? If something is passive as opposed to active.
It's not doing anything.
Yeah, it's not, not doing anything. It is, think of like, there's like an audience. If you're passively observing something like watching a cutscene in a game, you're passive. You're not actively involved. But if you're doing something, you're active. So he says, the passions mean we're acted upon as opposed to acting. Now, what he claims is this. How does having an adequate or clear idea change us from being acted upon to acting? This is what he claims. Once we have a clear understanding of the emotions, the passions, he claims, then we'll be free, at least to a degree, of their effects. And he claims that a passion ceases to be a passion once we have a clear and distinct understanding. In other words, once we know what it is, it ceases to control us. We're no longer controlled by it. Now, this may not, as he notes himself, this may not work like absolutely, it may not be like perfect freedom. But his claim is that once you understand it, then you become free. Now, a good question to be is that true, and is that useful? Well, I guess we can put it to the test. We could take, we could use the example of anger. Would understanding anger, how it works, would that free a person from anger? Its control?
I think so. Because, for instance, I feel like everything, I don't want to say a mind thing, but I think better terms is a mind thing. So, as far as something that makes you angry or angers you, once you understand, like Spinoza was saying, basically everything happens because, God is God. So let's say if I understand that, I will be slow to let things anger me because I understand that it's beyond my control. Basically everything happens for a reason. Well, the reason being, for Spinoza, say, that God is God. So I no longer get angry about it because I know it's beyond my control. So I understand where it comes from. So I think so.
Yeah, because if you know, as I said, if you know that it's not something you have control over, your anger would have no
Something
Yeah.
to stand on.
Yeah, no effect. There'd be no reason.
It sounds like the foundation for cognitive therapy.
Yeah, how so?
Cognitive therapy is a non-pharmaceutical treatment plan for mental illness that involves mindfulness. Is that you learn how to become aware of your thoughts and the emotions that rise from your thoughts so that you can control your responses to your emotions. Like an example would be somebody that's feeling sad and depressed because they think that nothing they ever do does well. It'd be identifying that thought that is overgeneralizing and assessing the truth behind that thought. Is everything you've ever done really a failure? Is that really, really true? And then trying to change your emotions based on the actual truth of the situation instead of what your mind is trying to tell you.
Yeah, if someone could do that, then that would put them in, as I say, put them in control of their emotion. Now, any reason to think that it wouldn't work? Like you could have a clear understanding of anger, but contrary to Spinoza, that the anger might still control someone.
Just emotion. Like sometimes you can't control your emotions. Like we were saying about if we were be able to basically not rewire, but kind of rewire the way some of our emotions work internally. Then it'll be easier for us to solve different things. So I feel like some you just can't control. You know, but it still gets to you.
Yeah, like a person may understand their anger, understand exactly why they're angry, how the anger works, all the chemistry of it and so on, but still feel it, because as long as they're still feeling it, the anger could still be controlled. They might say, I know exactly why I'm angry, I know exactly how anger works, but
Yeah, I think like with certain circumstances, that's how I am. Like certain circumstances, I can let it go. Like I know everything happens for a reason. I think about the bigger picture. But some things, certain things, is like I'm just so mad. Like I just can't let it go, even though it's beyond me. It's just you still like harboring. You know, you're still human, for lack of a better term. So.
Yeah, a person may realize there's nothing they can do. And maybe, you know, in the case of like Spinoza, like it's happening of necessity, but it may be the case where they simply have no power over it, like someone who's died.
Right.
And they have no way to change that, and so they have no power, but they may still be angry. And knowing all that may not help, may not help them completely. Yeah, so there is that very practical question, like to what extent having that understanding would free a person. And there's also the question raised earlier, is being free of our emotions something we actually want to not? Because interestingly, in science fiction, the common theme is usually when they have a robot, like Data in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Android, or the kind of original version is Pinocchio. Pinocchio needs a puppet, but he wants to be a real boy. He wants to experience emotions. And so it's a common theme that this is something, because what Spinoza's kind of pointing towards is you would have the intellectual understanding of the emotions, like here's how they all work, how it works mechanically. In that idea, you'd be free of them because you'd realize what it all is. You'd realize, oh, anger is just this. Once I know what it is, it's an illusion, it has no control over me anymore. Love is this. Once I realize what it is no control over me. It's, you can go with the analogy, it'd be sort of like with, imagine, Google builds a thinking machine, but it doesn't feel. So it could have, understanding of all the emotions. It could understand them better than we do, but never actually feel them. And so in a sense, it'd be like, Spinoza's ideal. It would completely understand the emotions, but not be within them, not be experiencing them. And then, of course, the usual thing is that, in sci-fi, the robot always wants to get emotions, in feeling. And Spinoza says, well, that would be this is the ideal, not being controlled by them. So, which is right? I mean, is it better? I mean, there's some, like anger, probably better not to be controlled by your anger. But are there some emotions that you would be better, still being controlled by, so to speak?
People still drive off their emotions, helps them get where they're going sometimes. I think for the most part, it helps more than saying, well, you can just know all your emotions, because either way, when life happens, you're going to react to it some type of way.
Yeah, to a point, maybe in terms of motivation. I think if someone doesn't feel anything, that's the whole reason we have to do things. If winning feels the same as defeat, if love feels the same as hate, that is to say doesn't feel at all, how would somebody make choices or deciding what to do? And that's a problem we're running into, I guess, with intelligent machines. If they don't feel like we do, what motivates them to do? Could you have? Well, when we get to David Hume, we'll see Hume claims that reason is and always ought to be the slave of the passions. That what we do is basically our intellect is kind of like our driver. That we tell it where to go and it takes us places. I want to go rob a bank, and then it drives us there, and we do stuff. So there's that question in philosophy, but also in life. Is there value in feeling those emotions? And again, argument by literature and fiction is that's a common theme. That they're not just sci-fi movies, movies in general about people who are too emotionally controlled, but then they discover love, and then everything gets great. What is the exact opposite of Spinoza? Spinoza did a movie, and he's someone controlled by their emotions, going through a disaster, then learning how to control them, and then they would end up being happy. Like giving up love and hate and all that stuff. I guess it depends on what kind of movie you like. The machine going to being the feeling, Pinocchio becoming a boy, or the reverse. So what he claims is the understanding will help us. And once we achieve that, then the safety lies in your understanding. Now, so how is this going to work out? Well, this is what he claims. The sort of the key to happiness, according to Spinoza, the key to controlling all emotions in general, be it anger, sadness, love, is this. He claims that our emotions all arise from one central mistake. The central mistake is this, that we believe, well, it's actually 2 mistakes, well, 3 mistakes, 20 mistakes. All comes down to this. Our emotions arrive from the following mistakes. One mistake is past focused. We believe that things could have been different. We ask the question, what if? What if I had done something differently? The other mistake is towards the future. We think that things can be different. So this is basically could have been different, and this is can be different. So we think that we could have done otherwise, and we think we can do otherwise. And according to Spinoza, that's the core mistake we make, is believing that things are not a matter of necessity, that things could have been otherwise, that things can be otherwise. And of course, it also apply now, that we think we're in control of what happens now. But he claims, once we accept that all things happen by necessity, the past could not have been any different, the future cannot be any different, what is, it cannot be otherwise. That is, he claims, true freedom. Freedom, ironically, freedom is realizing you are not free. Now, what argument can be made for Spinoza here? Well, we can go through a couple of some of the emotions as an example. Let's take regret. Regret is what? What is the feeling of regret involved?
Wishing you could have, or you shouldn't have did something.
Yeah. Someone might, the person might regret not taking the chance at asking someone out. Or a person might regret not having, moved to California to pursue their dream of becoming an abstract painter and dancer and cat trainer. Yeah, so some of these are basically things we think we could have done something different. So if someone didn't go to California to pursue their dreams of being an abstract painter, they would regret that, thinking, I could have gone to California. I could have been a painter. What about guilt? What makes people feel guilt?
Feeling like they should have never did it.
Yeah, what they should have done. Then they should have, helped the person out, or they shouldn't have been so mean. And they think that they could have done things differently. And similarly, even positive emotions, feeling like pride. When we feel proud of something, our decision, we believe that we could have done something worse, that we affected the outcome. Yeah, so our negative emotions towards the past all involve thinking we could have done something better. We could have made the better decision. And all our positive emotions are generally praising ourselves. We did chose the right thing. Now towards the future, hope involves what? We think we can make things better. We hope and change. We hope we can change and change so we can hope things. This, of course, assumes that we can make things different. Similarly, fear involves thinking that bad stuff will happen and that we won't be able to deal with it. Now, Spinoza's view is once we accept that nothing could have been different and everything will be what it is, as a friend of mine says, there's nothing we can do, it's ripping us. In that case, well, think of something that you literally cannot have done anything differently. And you realize that. Would you regret that? No, because if you truly understand that, I could have done nothing different. would have made no difference. We would feel no regret. Similar like with guilt. If you knew that you couldn't have done anything differently, the only reason to feel guilt is when you could have done something differently and you could have done better, but you didn't. But if it's true we couldn't have done otherwise, there's nothing to feel guilty about. You could not have done anything differently. Nothing you would have done, you couldn't have changed it. And so it had to be exactly what it had to be. So if someone like didn't help out a friend and their friend ended up, let's take something horrifying, their friend ended up committing suicide because they didn't answer, the friend called them, they didn't answer the phone, they said, oh, this person's always whining about stuff, trying to help them. They found the next day the friend's dead. But normally we feel guilt about that. But if Spinoza is right, could you have done anything? No, you didn't answer the phone because you could not have answered the phone. You normally think, I could have answered the phone, I could have helped them. But if Spinoza is right, you could not have answered the phone. It would be impossible. Similarly for the future. There's nothing to hope or fear because it's simply going to be what it is. There's nothing you can do. Now, on one hand, does that work? I mean, if someone truly believed that they could not do anything differently, would they feel guilt?
Where would the motivation come from?
Yeah, they'd have no reason to, yeah. You know, if I truly believe that I could not have done anything different, there's nothing I could have done. For example, do you feel guilt about the sinking of the Titanic or World War II? No, because there's nothing you could have done. I mean, you were there, but there's nothing you could do. Likewise, you can't change any of the things that happened. You couldn't have done anything differently at the time. So I would say, yeah, you know, on the plus side, the worst thing you ever did, you're not responsible for because, in a way, because you could not have done otherwise. Now, of course, the best things you ever did, you shouldn't feel pride about because you couldn't have done otherwise. So it's kind of got, kind of going both ways. So does that actually work? Does that free us? Because again, his freedom is not that we're free in, free will. The freedom is we realize that we're not free. And it's emotional freedom. So, for example, we can take a case. Suppose someone feels really guilty about things they've done. And they have all kinds of regrets about their past, about what they think are poor choices. If the person truly accepted there was nothing they could have done, everything turned out as it had, they couldn't change a thing, would they probably feel better? Yeah, they'd be free from guilt, free from regret. And if someone's afraid of the future, but they realize there's nothing they can do, there's no reason to fear that. There's nothing to do. And similarly with hope. There's no reason to hope because there's nothing you can do. Yeah, so in a way it kind of works. In a weird kind of way. And this is also similar to throw in some historical context for free. There are some folks called Stoics in Greek and Romans, and their view, we get our term Stoicism from it. That life is tough, be tougher. And they had a similar view. They believe that things are determined, and they use, one of their analogies was this. Life is like a box of chocolates. No, sorry, wrong analogy. Their view is life is like, it's like a cart pulled by a donkey. And each of us is a dog tied to the cart. Now, we have two choices. One is we can try to resist the cart. But if you're a little dog pulling against a big mule, who's going to win? Yeah, the mule. So you can be just dragged down the road. Or you can trot along beside the wagon. So you get two choices. Being dragged down the road or running alongside the wagon. No matter what you do, you're going to end up there. But you can be trotting along or dragged along. So the Stoics believe we could control our attitude. You have such sayings as, it is not life that makes us suffer, but our attitude towards life. And Spinoza is presenting some dead Stoic. I think it was like a Epictetus. I think it was Epictetus. They have all kinds of cool sayings. They're really good, like for if you ever do like coaches often like them. They like to quote the Stoics because coaches are all about making people suffer a whole bunch. And it's better with quotes. Suffering is better with quotes. I think like you feel like you're suffering at some point. Yeah, also Stoics are, there's the Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. He wrote a work, he was a famous Stoic philosopher, and the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius are actually pretty good. If you ever, feeling like life is tough, they're actually a good read because they teach you how to endure suffering. And you can also read the Book of Five Rings, about the art of war, if you want to inflict not suffering on others, but if you want to face life. So yeah, philosophy is actually pretty useful for that kind of stuff. Now, that's what he claims. You understand it, you'll feel less pain. Now, since this is all about ethics, a good question might be, what about good and evil, all that stuff? But before heading into the land of evil, anything about this new stuff? Okay, so in sum, basically what he's offering us is this. Okay, the problem is emotions make you suffer. You feel guilt about what you've done. For example, suppose on Valentine's Day you get the wrong chocolates for the person, or they're expecting a ring or diamond, and all you get them is chocolate. Well, what can you tell yourself? Well, Spinoza would say this. You cannot do otherwise. You should not feel any regret or guilt because things could not have been different. If you got them the chocolate, you could not have gotten them the ring. If they say to you, you couldn't have got me a ring, you could say, no, I cannot. According to Spinoza, I cannot have done otherwise. And that always works. Once you bring up Spinoza, all problems are solved. Like in marriage counseling. The person just brings up Spinoza, I had to cheat with those 23 hookers because it's a matter of necessity. And the wife always forgives, or the husband, depending on how it goes. Now, does that actually work?
No.
Probably not. But honey, Spinoza said it. But he claims we'll feel better about it. So what about the ethical stuff? How does good and evil and all that stuff fit in here? Well, this is what he claims. At first, he starts off seeming a bit like a relativist. How so? Well, since everything occurs by necessity, good and evil really aren't present in nature. How so? Well, I'll use a usual example, kind of an absurd example to show how this happens. Suppose I've got a Barbie doll, a Ken doll, and a G.I. Joe doll. And, Ken and Barbie, of course, are married. Marriage or convenience. No real love there. I'm sorry, it's sad, but true. And so Barbie seeks the warm embrace and kung fu grip of G.I. Joe. So they're having an affair in the Barbie dream house. And then Ken catches Barbie. Now, is G.I. Joe and Barbie, are they bad?
On Ken's perspective, yeah.
Well, what's Ken's perspective, given that his head, he's a plastic shell? Ken has no, I mean, if I'm just playing it out, when I go, oh, bad G.I. Joe, you should be punished, should the G.I. Joe doll really be punished? No, because G.I. Joe doll can't say, no, I refuse to have an affair, it's wrong. Because you just make them do whatever you make them do, because they're just, puppets in your hands. So if we're controlled by necessity, if you are, G.I. Joe or Ken or Barbie, you just do what you do. You're like in a play where you have to say all your lines. You can't go off script at all. And so there seems to be no good or evil, because evil we think of as it's something you had to choose to do. So if I'm driving along and someone trips and falls in the road and I can't stop fast enough, am I evil if I run them over? Am I a bad person?
No, you couldn't control it.
Yeah, I couldn't control it. And all of life is like that, according to Spinoza. So there is no good, there is no evil. So what do we mean when we talk about good and evil? Well, Spinoza takes a similar view to our good dead friend Tommy Hobbes. He says, good and evil are subjective evaluations based on how something impacts our concerns. So much like Hobbes and many other thinkers, he says good is just what we mean by what we like, what favorably impacts our interests. Bad is what we dislike, what goes against our interests. It's desire aversion. Good is what we desire, evil is what we avoid. So it would seem that we end up with moral subjectivism. He says the same thing may be good for one person, at the same time bad for another. Now, being a subjectivist is generally a bad place to be. So how does he get out of that problem? Well, this is what he does. He claims that virtue leads to a power independence consistent with the inner drive for self-preservation. So what does he mean? Well, this is what he claims. Much like Hobbes and other thinkers, he thinks reason is a good God. It does not do anything or demand anything opposed to nature. And reason tells us that we should love ourselves, seek our own profit, and going back to that Conatus thing, to seek to preserve ourselves. So it would seem that he's sliding into what's called the moral view of ethical egoism. As opposed to Legoism, which is the love of Legos and waffles. Those are not things, but they should be. Maybe they are things. Anyways, egoism, ethical egoism is a view that what you should do is acting your own self-interest. Or put kind of crudely, perhaps unfairly, is that the right thing to do is to be selfish. Look out for yourself first, not always in the world. And Tommy Hobbes, who saw, had that view. Ayn Rand had that view. And they both did. So it tells you if you're an ethical egoist, you die. And then so does everyone, so there you go. So how does he avoid becoming an ethical egoist? Well, he ends up doing it in kind of a weird way, and here's how. Given Spinoza's view, is there really any private self, private interest? Is there really a me? Is there really a you? No, because it's all gone. I mean, does your spleen have separate interests from your liver? No. I don't use cancer because cancer is bad. But yeah, because those are just, our individuality is just an illusion. And so the way to achieve the serenity that he promises is to look at things, in a nice phrase, under the aspect of eternity, or in fancy Latin, sub specie asternat. I blew it. Asternitatis. I can't pronounce that like a damn. For real. It's like a serious defect. Now, he ends up going from selfishness to sort of like a communalism. How so? Well, this is what he says. There's nothing more excellent for preservation, for all to agree that the minds and bodies of all should form one mind and one body, and that all should seek the common good of all. Which on one hand sounds nice. We're all one. Happiness of all. Kind of a Bernie Sanders thing. But it's also kind of a creepy thing. Kind of like the Borg said, you be assimilated, the collective, where you lose your individuality and you become merely part of the whole, like a collective or hive mind. So Spinoza ends up avoiding egoism because essentially we're all one, we're all God. So is he worried about that? Is our individual private interest, is that all an illusion? Are we mistaken? We can take a concrete example. Right now in New Hampshire, the land of coal and maple syrup, which is close to my home, which is a land of coal, maple syrup, lobsters, blueberries, bear, and whoopie pies. If you have any whoopie pie, you got it. They're the best. They're the real thing. They are truly awesome. I have an entire cookbook devoted just to them. Anybody have them?
No.
You owe yourself. You owe yourself a genuine made whoopie pie. Apparently people in Pennsylvania claim to also make them. They are heretics. Do not touch their devil's cakes.
What is in them? Is it different things in each one?
Magic. Unicorn rainbows. And love. No, basically they're like a cake, kind of like a, and then, well, they're basically shaped like, picture, if you will, like two cookies, big cookies. Well, look like this.
It's a gigantic cake
Yeah.
Oreo.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, there's like the frosting. You gotta put a lot of frosting in there. Some people make like thin ones, but I like to like make like double frosting and make them like really thick of frosting, because that way you eat one, your blood crystallizes, you lay there on the floor for a couple days, and you're good. But yeah, they're awesome. Now I want one really badly. I usually keep a stash in my freezer. I get them and freeze them, and then ration them out. But I'll have to make some more. But anyways, I was being led astray by the power of the whoopie pie. Contrary to Spinoza, who would say, do not fall prey to the whoopie pie. Probably because he would have changed his whole philosophy. But getting back to the main point, I mean, he's right about that. Is the self just an illusion? No, we'll go to going back to the main point of New Hampshire. We have, Trump battling against Cruz and Rubio and the other guy, Jeb. And we have Sanders up against, Hillary, fighting to see who will be president. Now, on Spinoza's view, of course, the result is already, set. In fact, the president is already set. It's all, nothing can be any different. But on Spinoza's view, their striving and contesting is, irrational, because his view is we should be, regard ourselves as, a common, working towards a common good, one body, one mind, so we shouldn't have all this fighting. And is he right about that? Yeah, I mean, to use an analogy, what if your cells are fighting your other cells? In medicine, we call that, cancer, which is bad. And so that kind of conflict could be like cancer in God's, body, so to speak. But of course, it loses some of its power because for, Spinoza, it all works out anyways. So we can't change it. So one kind of problem with this is the paradox we saw with Hobbes, Tommy Hobbes, namely this. Hobbes says, it's all determined, all material. But then he gives us all this advice what we should do to avoid chaos. But if he's right and it's all determined, advice is pointless. And I always use this analogy. Suppose you see someone falling off a really tall building, and they're plummeting towards the ground. They have no parachute, nothing. Does yelling advice at them do any good? Like, try not to die. No, because there's nothing they can do. Or another analogy would be people who yell stuff at the screen in movies like, don't go in the house. Does that help?
No.
How many times has the person that turned to the audience on the screen and said thank you and walked away from the house? It actually would be kind of funny in a movie like interacting. They'd freak people out. Thank you, Betsy, for saying that. That would be pretty cool.
They do that in some TV shows sometimes.
Yeah.
Like some sitcoms, they'll like have them there talking to the audience.
Yeah, the person will step.
Yeah.
Yeah, will step out of character,
Character.
or they'll respond to like what they think the audience is probably going to say. Yeah, so one of his problems is he gives us all this advice, but if he's right, you'll only achieve like what he considers to be the appropriate state if you're going to do that. If you have to do it. If you never achieve it, do you bear any blame? Well, no, because it's not up to. There's no free will. It's not. You don't choose to do this or not do this. So one of the paradoxes is again, he's like yelling at the movie screen. Stop doing that. Like a movie about bad relationships. You can yell at the person all day. Don't date that person. He's bad for you. I don't change anything. You can't do otherwise. So it's like yelling at the movie screen. And so one of the sort of classic problems with it, if you take the view that everything is necessary, giving advice is kind of, totally pointless, because people can't do any different, because advice assumes people could do something different. If someone's playing a video game and they're screwing up and you give them advice, that's one thing, because we think what they can do different, like stop standing in the fire, for example. But if they're watching a movie, yelling advice at them is not going to help at all, because they're not in control. Now, of course, Spinoza could just say, well, I'm determined to give advice, because I got to, so there. But it does kind of render the whole point of advice giving pointless. Now, what about love? Now, For Spinoza, the only Valentine worth having is, of course, God. Look at God something nice. Of course, he already has everything, so I don't know if we can get the person who literally does have everything, or is everything. Maybe it's the thought that counts. Now, he claims you achieve the highest form of knowledge by seeing everything as God, an eternal logical system caused by God. And he believes that this is the path to salvation, an intellectual love of God that is your salvation, your blessedness, your freedom. Now, in traditional religion, does God love people back?
Yes.
Yeah, and for St. Augustine, God is love. And love is blind, Ray Charles is blind, so Ray Charles is. It's just logic. It's just logic. That's categorical logic right there. Now, on Spinoza's view, of course, God does not love us back. Why? Well, because God is, for Spinoza, not a person. He doesn't hate, doesn't love, doesn't feel joy. And, of course, he's totally determined in the sense that nothing could be any different.
Okay, just a few cents back. You say you achieved the highest score. He says you achieved the highest score of knowledge by what I'm saying?
Oh, by realizing everything is an eternal, forever system, logically connected system that is God. So the gist of it is basically you achieve true freedom by realizing that it's all God and it's all necessary. Things cannot, basically it's God. Once you realize God, that is total freedom, or so he claims. The total realization that you are not, there is no you, there is just God, and there is no freedom, except the freedom of knowing there is no freedom. Which is kind of weird. There you go. Now, he does kind of cheat a little bit here, because he does say that God doesn't love us, but he does say that since we're part of God, when God loves himself, he loves us. So, when you love like yourself, you love your school and yourselves, I guess. That's kind of the deal. Now, one interesting question in religion, theology, and also philosophy is, what is the love of God? Because people who are religious talk about loving God, or sometimes fearing God. And so the question is like, what is that like? And some churches have, it's a very passionate thing. People, speaking in tongues, yelling, and doing all kinds of emotional, powerful stuff. But his view is not like that. His view of the love of God is, to use an analogy, it's the intellectual satisfaction of solving like a mathematical equation. Or maybe the satisfaction, to use a modern example of, working out, programming an app, like the satisfaction of completing that. So it's sort of a cold, not like I guess it's kind of a cold satisfaction, intellectual satisfaction, not like a passionate thing. So it's kind of like, yes, I solved that.
Is that kind of like when you said, like, if a triangle could talk, it would see it from the triangle's point of view, or the circle?
Yeah.
It would be from the circle.
Yeah. Yeah, and he thinks that, it's that kind of satisfaction. So he claims. So has he read about that? Is that the proper love of God? To say, I love God like I love a quadratic equation. Good Valentine's card. Baby, I love you like I like differential equations. Is that a Hallmark bestseller? Should be. Yeah, so he believes the ultimate goal is an intellectual love of God, not a feeling of passion towards God, but that intellectual love. It's like the satisfaction of completing a proof, or solving a philosophical problem, or finishing a puzzle, solving that puzzle. So one part of traditional theology addresses again is love. So God loves you, but he's not in love with you, I guess, because he loves himself. Now what about another important part of theology? Most monotheistic faiths offer what? You die, and what's supposed to happen?
Go to heaven.
Yeah, heaven if you're good.
Hell is bad.
Yeah, hell if you're bad. Now, Spinoza does not believe in traditional immortality. Traditional immortality is, it's like what you see in, fiction. The idea is like, movies like Heaven Can Wait and Touched by an Angel, etc., where you die, and you go off to a place, and you're still, conscious, you're still you, except you're ghosty, or you got like a halo thing, some cool wings, maybe a jetpack. I assume they'll update that, maybe the jetpacks in heaven, or Iron Man armor, but it's all gold. That was sweet. Anyways, it could be worth dying for, maybe, or whatever. Maybe you get the coolest thing you can imagine. Now, Spinoza does not give us individual immortality. So, on his view, when you die, you don't when your body fails, you don't wake up in heaven. That's the bad news. I guess on the good news, you don't wake up in hell. So, I guess that's great. So you don't have to worry about there is no hell, there is no heaven. But what kind of immortality do we have? Well, we have an odd sort of immortality, which is this. He believes that the mind does not totally perish. Something of it remains, which is eternal. Now, looked at poetically, his idea is this. Since each of us has been, we shall always have been. And it shall always be true that we have been. We have our piece of eternity. It shall always have been that I was. It shall always have been that you were. So in a sense, you do exist forever. It will be forever true that you were. To use an analogy, imagine you get a film. And you have a character who dies early on. No, they killed Kenny. Oh, Kenny's an exit. Kenny always comes back. No, they killed Bob. Yes, you get a character who dies. Now, the character, of course, is absent from the rest of the movie, except in flashbacks. But, of course, if you look at the film, it's always true that that character is always there in those scenes. So the character always and forever has...
Exists.
Yeah, exists. It exists in that movie. So, even if they die, they're forever part of the movie. If you look at eternity like that, you always own that piece of eternity. Here is like now, which is always moving forward. And suppose, this is the end of a particular person that comes to an end. But it'll always be true that they were forever and ever. They'll always own their piece of eternity. Now, one thing I guess that's kind of cool, it'll always be true that I was. It'll always be true that you were. But is that the immortality that we want? That'll always be true that we once were. Well, can you live here? No, because from our perspective, once our time runs out, we're gone. It's true. It's always true that we were, but it's always true that what you had for breakfast yesterday. It's always going to be true that say you had an egg and muffin. It's always true that egg and muffin was the eternal muffin. Yeah. So what we want is not that it's true that we always were. We want it to be true that we always be. We want to be forever. And Spinoza says, nope, you're not getting none of that. So I guess it's one hand, I guess it's cool, we're always part of it.
I'm sorry,
Oh, is that your flash drive?
It is mine. Thank you.
Oh, let me eject it for you.
Sorry, class.
Eject. Oh, Windows, why are you so low? Oh, there we go.
Bravo. Thank you.
Sorry. A special guest appearance. Dr. Stephen Payson. So, it's true, when we die, there always have been, but probably not like super satisfying. So, I guess we'll close on that. Is that enough? We're supposed to know this is true. In fact, it's got to be true. It will be true unless the past can be written. it'll always true that you were. Or is that enough?
So what does he think happens? Then we just black out this?
Yeah, you're just gone. I mean, well, actually, you're not gone, because in a way you never were, because there was no separate self.
Kind of just keeps
Yeah,
going.
in some ways it's kind of like, in classic Buddhism, if you ever saw the movie The Matrix, there's the line where like Neo was talking to a kid, and he says, there is no spoon. And in Buddhism, it's a reference to Buddhism, there is no self. There is no you, there is no me.
That's true.
And so you never, in a way, you never, on one hand, you never were, you're never a separate entity. So you were, there is God, and God is forever. So you always be. But is that satisfying? Yeah, because we want to keep on going as us. But his view is that that's a mistake, because the self is an illusion, that there is just God. So don't worry, be happy, know it's all God, never be sad. Never be sad. Think of the book of eyes. That's what I do. Whenever I'm sad, I just think of the book of eyes.
I have to try it now.
You do have to try it. They're really good.